I want to welcome you for joining us for our special WMU Cooley Black History Month Community Conversation presentation. Now I begin the introduction of our speaker. Zenell Brown is a court administrator. She's an author and champion of inclusion. Zenell B. Brown Esquire has worn many hats during her career. She melds her court leadership, crucial conversations, dispute resolution skills, and diversity and skills leading the administrative operations of the Third Circuit Court in Michigan, one of the busiest trial courts in the nation. Zenell has been recognized for her leadership in court management, diversity, and inclusion, and she volunteers for several bar associations and nonprofit organizations. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Zenell Brown.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jackie, and thank you for having me here, Jackie and Terry. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your lunch hour to be here. I've been around courts and around the law since 1987, and I think as a part of Black history, I want to celebrate some of the people that I've met along the way, some of the people that I've learned about along the way, and put them at the forefront of Black History Month. So when I started off in 1987 at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. And the only other Black person that was around me was the secretary. She was a legal secretary. She had been there 20 years, very proficient at what she did, and also a source of encouragement. She was one of the people that I talked to when I was going to enter law school. And actually one of the people who used to do my typing for me while I was in law school. So I'm deeply indebted to Cynthia Nelson for that. Then I took a turn and went to the state of Michigan. Then I ended up in the Wayne County Circuit Court in 1990, I believe it's 97. So almost 10 years after starting in Oakland County, I end up in Wayne County. And I started off there in the front of the court. And I'm going to get back to my experience there, my personal experience. But what I want to start off with is sharing some of the things that I've learned about the court system and the history of the court system and the significance of the Black contributions there. As I've sat there as the friend of the court, and also as I've sat there as the court administrator. I want to thank the Detroit Legal News as well as Lawyer Weekly for anytime I submitted something, they were so gracious to think it was worthy of publication. And this month I sent something to Lawyers Weekly and I shared about some historical people, Black figures that I learned about just by researching or through conversation. And I implored those who read the articles, look at this history and then think about how it can ignite some conversations where you are in your workplace. One of the first people that I researched for this article was Macon Bowling Allen. And he passed the bar in 1844. And we know that slavery was still, alive and active in the South until 1865. So he's really ahead of the curve. But what we also see is that he's not accepted as a lawyer. He had to actually leave where he passed the bar in Maine to go practice elsewhere to build a practice. And one of the things that I've asked people to look at there is to think about, are we really a welcoming practice to diverse populations? And how can we make sure that we do have adequate pipelines and are building bridges so those who don't look traditionally of what we thought a lawyer should look like in 1800s, 1700s, to today, how do we make sure that they have access and opportunity to practice law and to be part of this community? The second person I outlined there was Charlotte E. Ray, who was the first Black American woman lawyer in the United States. She enrolled in Howard University under the name C.E. Ray. And that was so nobody would know her gender. And oftentimes when we think about suffragettes, we don't think about Black women and the role they played. But definitely if you're a Black woman or a woman lawyer, this is somebody that you should know about, be willing to find more about, and then start asking yourselves, how do we lift each other up? And, who opened the doors? And was everybody a monolith? Because if you start looking at the suffragette movement, you will see that there are people of all ethnicities, of all sexual and gender identities, and we need to make sure that we know who they are and are thanking them for their contributions to making the law move forward and to making sure that the rights of women were acknowledged and moved forward as well. And finally, in the article, the person I pointed out to was William Hastie. He was a Harvard Law School graduate, and he became the first African American federal judge in 1937. He had a stellar undergraduate career at Amherst College. He was first in his class, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. And what he represented to me
I know.
personally,
Okay, well, when you're ready, I was just checking.
what he represented to me personally was that lesson that I
Yeah,
learned at
yeah. I
home.
mean, if you're not hungry, you take stuff out. I was just checking on you.
Am I good? So he represented to me the lesson that I learned at home, early on, that if you're a person of color, the world is going to hold you to a higher standard. So go in and always make sure you're doing your best. He also represented to me that, when you go into a place, 9 times out of 10, if you're the only person who looks like you, everybody's judging everyone else from your race based upon your contributions. So make sure you're representing us well. He later goes on and he's getting an appointment as a judge, and he's the first to receive a federal appointment as an African American. And he's appointed to, let me see, where was it? The Virgin Islands. And I start wondering, why the Virgin Islands? We have 50 states that are right here contiguous. Why the Virgin Islands? But he was appointed to the Virgin Islands. And I also wonder at that point, sometimes how the politics plays in it. You can make an appointment, but you can't make a controversial an appointment. And then I started, connecting that with Ketanji Brown, Brown Jackson, and thinking about, okay, so when Biden came out and he said, I'm going to select an African American woman and nominate her to the Supreme Court, what the response of the nation was. So many people felt like, oh, that means that you're lowering the qualifications or you're leaving certain people out. But I think it was just a bold move to say, hey, I know that there's talent, and talent is not defined by race, it's not defined by gender, and it's time that we start looking to expand that talent pool. So like I said, I want to thank Lawyers Weekly for sharing that. Now I want to turn to some of the other things that I've discovered since working in the court system. In 1998, the Third Circuit Court joined with the Recorder's Court. Before that, there were two separate entities. The Recorder's Court was located in the city of Detroit, and if you committed a felony that occurred in the city of Detroit, you were going to Recorder's Court. If you committed a felony that was in Wayne County but outside of the city of Detroit, you were going to go to the Third Circuit Court. In 1998, they came together both under the umbrella of the Third Circuit Court. What's distinct there is that prior to 1998, because of the demographics in Detroit, you had a lot of judges who were in Recorder's Court who were African American. And then when the two merged, those judges not only had to run for election in the city of Detroit, they had to run for the election countywide. So it became a different type of campaign that they actually had to run and had to appeal and campaign more widely than they did when there was Recorder's Court. You would look over the years and then you would see that percentage of African American judges sort of dwindle once that merger became about. And I was very fortunate to work with chief judges who noticed that. And they would, send information to the governor and say, are you paying attention to this as you make appointments? That our bench needs to represent the community that we're serving. But oftentimes, the community, those representatives of the community, don't have an easy way to get to the bench. It's so costly to run the elections, it's hard to challenge incumbents. So, as you're making your appointments, please do not leave diversity and representation off the table. Prior to the appointment of Judge Blount at Third Circuit, we would have had Judge Edwards, and I believe it was Judge Hood only in our criminal division. So then when Judge Blount comes about, Judge Hood goes to the Court of Appeals, we continue to have that African American male presence there, which would have been sorely lacking, and there would only been two judges, African American men judges within the Third Circuit Court on that bench had that appointment not been made in that criminal division. So it's very important that, again, we're not saying that we're looking for quotas or anything like that, but we're asking that people have a more expansive view of what a judge looks like, and making sure that when there's consideration for judges, that the whole pool of applicants, it's a very diverse pool, that we want to make sure that diversity is there. As far as some of the historical characters I think that we need to know about, or the historical figures we need to know about, when you think of the first person in Michigan who was appointed for judgeship, that would be Charlie Wesley Jones. He was appointed to the Recorder's Court, and that was in the early 1950s. He was not able to return to the Recorder's Court because he was not reelected. You then have the illustrious career of Judge Wade McCree, who served, in Third Circuit and the Recorder's Court. And he continued to be elected. He continued to be appointed. He goes on for, U.S. Attorney's Office and a number of things. Personally, I am very thankful for Judge Wade McCree. Never met him. However, my daughter was able to go to school without tuition, without me paying tuition, based on a McCree scholarship. So he's very well known. There's a lot of scholarships out there in his name for law schools and also for undergraduates. He's also known because he had a daughter who he wanted to go to an affluent school. She was denied that admission. So he helped co-founded what was called Friends School, which was a private school that had people of all races and all ethnicities and all denominations to go to attend. So he's known also for that contribution as well. Some of my favorite judges I've had the opportunity to work with, I would say, is Judge Murphy, who retired last year. And he was, well, really, you retire on January 1 of the following year. So he retired January 1 of this year. And he was the longest sitting judge in Michigan. And he had been with the Third Circuit since 1980. So he's been a wonderful judge to work with. And one of the unique things about Judge Murphy, one of the trivia or tidbits, is that Justice Kyra Bowden used to be his law clerk. So he'll always be known for that as well. And of course, you can't leave out Judge Strong when you're thinking of long-term serving judges, probably the most fashionable judge across the nation. You will see him at judicial events as well as you'll see him at celebrity events. He's had some background in as far as entertainment law, sitting on Third Circuit. He started off as a magistrate and a referee early in his career, and he also has service in the armed forces. So he's one of our veterans that we admire as well. And definitely, we don't want to leave our ladies off the list. And I want to start with Judge Lucille Watts. And she's really important to me because that's when I get to see the doors be open for women of color. And although she served as a judge, she was the first one who was elected that didn't have an appointment before and then just ran for reelection. But she was the first African American woman elected to the Third Circuit Court. And her history comes about in 1960s during the riot. She was there when African Americans were detained on Belle Isle and then taken over to the courthouse. She was there to help with their defense. She went to law school, she graduated, but the culture basically didn't have a place for a woman lawyer, so she opened her own law firm. So very much one of those trailblazers when you start thinking about, what do you do as a woman? What do you do as a Black woman? And how to become a lawyer and judge in that respect. Judge Cynthia Stevens and I had the opportunity to nominate her along with the Third Circuit Historical Society for the Women's Hall of Fame. She had not been nominated previously. We had the opportunity to nominate her. There's a clip on YouTube where Judge Stevens shares what was her interaction, because she actually swore Judge Stevens in as a judge. My only interaction with Judge Watts, personal interaction, is when I was at the Friend of the Court and she had retired as a judge, but she was actually still practicing as a lawyer. So this mature woman comes to the window and she's filing her motion, and I'm having this conversation and I'm answering questions, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, that's Judge Watts. I know it's Judge Watts. And you're sitting there and you're interacting with history. So I'm very grateful for that moment of time, but I'm also very grateful that we were able to get her nominated into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. Judge Stevens was very active in helping that happen. Also, Judge Mack from the probate court, Judge Colombo, and Judge Finch. A lot of people had stories to share and, were willing to do the write-up to make that happen. So that was a very special moment. And I also had the opportunity to share a little bit about Judge Stevens in an article with the Detroit Legal News. And the article was entitled Black History's Legacy, Legal Legacy, Judge Cynthia Diane Stevens. And Judge Stevens, to me, I would say she's the auntie to every African American attorney in the southeastern Michigan area. If there's something going on and you need some direction, you pick up the phone and you call her. Or if you don't pick up the phone and call her, she's going to pick up the phone and call you. When my mom passed a couple of years ago, she was the first person who called, from the legal community, left me a message, and she basically said, there are no words when you lose a mother, but I'm just letting you know that I'm thinking about you. So she's that warm embrace to let you know that there is a space, there's we're striving to make this a more inclusive experience. She's also been the champion for the DEI Commission in Michigan. So she's been doing this work in various reiterations over the decades, and now she's actually going to be co-chairing the commission with Justice Welch and making sure the work is formalized. And hopefully, once it becomes formalized, it becomes what we actually do, not just some ideal that we're thinking about doing something. So let me tell you a little bit about Judge Stevens. She was appointed to the Court of Appeals in 2008, but before that, she had served as a trial judge for 23 years. She served at 36th District, and she also served at Third Circuit Court. She was the second African American woman appointed to the Third Circuit Court. And of course, she was sworn in by Judge Lucille Watts. She served as the Chief Judge Pro Tem for the Third Circuit Court. She was very instrumental in bringing up the Mediation Tribunal Association at Third Circuit. And she's been the presiding judge, and she did the presiding judge for about 8 years. She's a graduate of Emory Law. She's admitted to practice in Georgia, Texas, and Michigan. And she served, with throughout the community. And like I said, probably the biggest thing that she's known for is being that social justice advocate. She'll be there on the committee. She'll be there, chairing the committees. She's always been that type of person. The person I want to conclude with about sharing a little bit about their history as a judge would be Judge Geraldine Bledsoe Ford. And she was already in the Women's Hall of Fame, so we didn't have to nominate her. But her mom was also in the Hall of Fame, which I thought was pretty interesting too. She served as a judge, and she was the first judge that ran and was elected. And, a lot of people said you're not going to be able to do this, but she actually did it, and she continued to be reelected. I was able to learn more about her when the Women Lawyers Association began giving out a diversity award in her name, and I was nominated for that award. She was very insistent upon there be affirmative action on the campus of U of M, where she had attended, and she wanted to make sure that no matter your race, no matter your gender, of course, that you could have opportunities and access available to you, those educational and professional opportunities available to you. One of the interesting things that I learned about her is Chief Judge Kinney, who retired also January this year, after I think over 40 years and 26 years on the bench. He used to be her assigned prosecutor. And he shared with me how she, told him, okay, so you're from Minnesota. Let me tell you a little bit about how things work in Detroit and bring you up to snuff on how to be a great prosecutor here in the city of Detroit. And he shared, that their families then had a long friendship after that. Her daughter now is a judge on 36th District. Judge Bledsoe Ford's granddaughter now is in law school. So now you're seeing that so often we see that other families have this, my grandfather was a judge, my dad was a judge, my son is a judge. We're seeing this replicated and played out. And all you can do is smile and be proud of it. For law schools, when we start thinking about, where some of the heroes there, my personal favorite all-time hero, I got to share this with you. And if you ever see this person, I want you to go up to Professor Florice Neville Yules. She's married to Judge Edward Yules. Go up to her and say, you gave Zenell Brown a B plus in your class. When are you going to change that grade? So that's her ongoing joke. She was the first person that I saw when I was at Wayne State Law who was a professor of color. And believe me, I saw her probably at one of the darkest points. And when you're thinking about, oh, I can't be a lawyer, I just can't do this, it's too much, I don't understand what you're doing. She was my professor, and I had like a real estate elective, a real property elective, and she was the professor there. And it's like everything just became clear. It became, you can do this. And I completed the class with the B plus. I'm happy with the B plus, but don't tell her that. And I never thought I would see her again. I'm done or whatever, it's a moment in time. When I came to the Third Circuit and I met Judge Yule, and then I start seeing her on a more regular basis, I had the opportunity to share the story with her. And I said, you gave me a B plus, but I really earned an A in that class. And so she and I laugh about that. And so it's important, even in our law schools, to have somebody that we can see that representation and reach out and feel the love. And I had the opportunity at a recent outing for the mediation tribunal, just to give her a big hug and said, okay, are you still working to get my A? But we have professors like that on Wayne State campus, like when you think of like Professor Littlejohn, who I didn't have the opportunity to be in his class, but I know that he too is lifting up a lot of legal heroes, especially legal heroes who are Black, such as Judge Crockett. And then today we can't forget like our Dean Green of Michigan State, or our Dean Green, or our Dean of U of DM, Jelani Jefferson Exum. These are the first Black deans of these Michigan law schools, and those two are great things. So throughout my career, I've seen a lot, and I've been inspired by a lot. I had the opportunity earlier this year to talk to Justice Bowden, who was previously my representative, who previously we worked at Third Circuit, but didn't really interact at Third Circuit on a regular basis. But to talk with her and just tell her, how proud I am of her and what she's doing also to open doors. So when I think about Black History Month and all of the people who have made these contributions, I get inspired. Then I look to what's the future, and I have to thank everybody for their contributions. And I mean, the allies, a lot of doors would not be open if it weren't for allies who had access and said, hey, can we collaborate? Hey, I mentioned your name here, or I mentioned your name there. And that's what I really think that our field needs to look like, that we're all in this together, we're all pushing each other forward, and we're ensuring that justice is for all. So I'm open for questions. Please just come off the mic, because I don't want to miss your hands. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just come off the mute and begin talking.
Okay. Well, you've said so many interesting things that I just feel like talking to you, Zenell, about all this stuff. One thing I want to talk to you about is you mentioned Wade McCree's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about Kathleen McCree Lewis?
Yes.
Kathleen, that's one of my, you mentioned legal heroes. She is one of my legal heroes. Kathleen McCree Lewis. She was this incredibly accomplished appellate specialist in Detroit, as you know, but I'll say for everyone's benefit. And she was just the most intelligent, classy, and supportive human being I ever had the pleasure of interacting with in my years in practice. She would go out of her way to support newer attorneys, including me, when I served with her on the council for the appellate practice section. And she was taken from us just way too soon, just so unfair. I'm still mad, because she just was and she was at a different firm, but I still considered her a very important mentor to me. And one of my memories from my practice days was going down to the U.S. Court of Appeals in Cincinnati to make oral argument. And I was assigned to a courtroom that had the painting of Wade McCree, her father. And I know that Wade McCree is the first African-American judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and that's important. And I think that Damon Keith was on the panel I argued to that day. So I just felt surrounded.
Wow.
I felt surrounded by these giants of Detroit legal history, and it was just a thrill for me. But really, the importance of that painting of Wade McCree was, to me at that time, was more, that's Kathleen's father. I was thinking more about her. So anyway, her memory is one that deserves to remain very much constant with us in all the things that she accomplished and stood for.
I think she would be a good person to nominate for the Women Hall of Fame too, the Michigan Women Hall of Fame.
Maybe
Definitely.
I'll do that. I need to do that.
I know, I can't think of which attorney it is. I don't know if it's Baskin, but somebody's doing something where they want to get a movie started about Wade McCree. They're like, how can, you have all these, you have your Jackie Robinson story. There should be a Wade McCree story, and he's trying to get momentum going with that. I did want to share a little bit about some of the things in the book. I shared, how in law school that I sort of felt, this isn't for me or whatever. And in the book, I share the first encounter with a person that I named Chuck, how that too felt like it was unwelcoming, like the court was not a welcoming place for an aspiring attorney of color. They only had, at the time that I was there and started as what would be considered a caseworker, there was one African American attorney on staff out of about 17 people. There was one African American, it was a female referee. And that was 1997 I started there. And by 1998 the referee had passed away. There was the one attorney, and then I got promoted, and it'll tell you the backstory about some of the shenanigans regarding the promotion, or the conversations that were regarding the promotion with one of the colleagues. And we then had an African American male join as well as a friend of the court attorney. That was it for about 10 something years. There wasn't any representation at the referee level. And if I go to the judges level, the first African American female judge I remember was Helen E. Brown. I got to be her friend of the court attorney, and Judge William Lucas. And if you look at the history, as I'm talking about, the lack of representation when it becomes a circuit court where everybody has to run across the circuit, especially in the domestic relations divisions, you'll see there's a lack of representation. And I'm so proud to say that in 2023, we have 3 African American women who are now sitting on that domestic relations bench. Judge Nicole Goodson, Judge Regina Triplett, and Judge Darnella Williams Claiborne. And prior to that, the last person who had been there of color would have been Judge Deborah Ross Adams. So we're talking probably about 8 to 10 years, and there wasn't that representation there. When you look at it on the referee end, after the judge passed away, the referee passed away, Referee Jones, Adelie Jones was her name. That would have been in 98. We had a referee transfer over from our juvenile division, and she stayed maybe 7 years. But after she left, we didn't have anyone of color until Judge Virgil Smith, who I also see as an icon on many fronts, as a lawyer, legislator, first African American chief judge of the Third Circuit Court. He came along, and then he said, we're opening this pool. There has to be people who are qualified to sit here as a referee, people of color. And we hired, at that time, we hired Hewlin Simpson, who had a background at Legal Aid and Defender's Office, to be a referee there. So just following the history of it and the dynamics and looking, where are people of color able to get those opportunities and make those contributions is fascinating.
Abel, I see that you have your hand raised. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Janelle, for being here today and for this unbelievable sharing all of this wonderful information with us. I thank you very much. I haven't read your book, but I'll put that on my list as a first thing in terms of getting for this. So thank you for that. One of the things I wanted to ask you, I embrace your comment in terms of how it makes a huge difference to see people that look like you and to help you get to where you need to go. I also have to just kind of comment on the allies that really impact. And just for me, I grew up in inner city Chicago, and there were ladies. They actually turned out to be three non-African American women who just kind of embraced some of the kids in the inner city. And I was one of those people that they just kind of poured into and caused me to know that the law was what I wanted to do. I missed, or you may have said in the beginning, and of course I haven't looked at the book, what got you interested in terms of even going to law school? What is it that motivated you to the point where you decided you wanted to go to law school?
So I've made up my mind probably about 5, 6, 7, not knowing what your thinking is, that, I'll be a lawyer. And I went ahead, I graduated, with my undergrad, I did paralegal and life was going well. And then my mom reminded me, you said you're going to law school. I was like, oh. So I went ahead at that point in time and I just submitted the application to Wayne, went to sit for, the LSAT, and then went to sit for another civil service exam. And then Wayne said, we'll accept you. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So I went ahead and I went to law school, and just being totally transparent, law school was like, this is not undergrad. The first time, you see a C's and C minus, is like, oh, this is not undergrad at all. And one of the professors there, he was my Civ Pro professor, he says, come meet with me after class and let's talk about how you're doing and how to improve your performance. And I was working full time, single mom. So I didn't know all the tricks and tools that, I didn't have the time to engage and learn it on my own. So he gave me a quick tutorial. He told me, go, get the old law school exams out the library, go buy some commercial outlines. I was like, this is how you do it. So again, like you say, it's the allies. And I didn't have the opportunity because of the work commitments and parenting commitments to connect to a lot of students at that time. And so it felt like it was a very lonely journey. And some of the things I did recognize, year one coming in as an evening student, maybe you saw 10 people of color. Year two coming back, maybe there were 7. And then you're like, okay, so this is hard. This is hard. So like I said, when I saw Judge Neville Yules, that was confirmation. Go ahead. It's more about perseverance. You can live with, you can live after a C. It's not that bad. But I was like just totally floored. This was not the experience that I thought it was going to be. And I would do it again.
No, excellent. Thank you.
Well, I've had the pleasure of knowing Zenell for a lot of years. I knew her when she was just in law school. I had just moved to Detroit at the tender age of 20 and didn't know very many people. She was my coworker, and then kind of by default ended up becoming my supervisor. And then the office closed, and that was Corporation and Securities Bureau. So I don't know if um, she had applied for law school before or during that or something. But when the office closed, she did have the opportunity to transfer to Lansing, and she declined that, took unemployment, and her mother supported her decision to go to law school full time way back then. And I mean, that had to have been a seed planted in me as well, that, this can be done, because I'm a first generation person on both sides of my extended family to have actually obtained any degree. And I was working on my undergraduate then and went to Wayne State myself. And so I know some stories, and I hope I'm not putting Zanella on the spot, but she did tell me to have a question ready. And you don't have to call any particular person out by name, of course. And I'm sure that there was more than just this one person that I'm thinking of, but maybe talk about some of the obstacles you had, and even talking with people who were kind of in charge of recruiting. I remember there was at least one particular person who just was blind to the lack of diversity and argued with you quite vociferously that
Mhm.
she felt she was doing all she could and that it just wasn't resulting. And you had to really open her eye. Well, you did open her eyes, whether you had to or not, I don't know, to these blind spots and how frustrating that must be. And I guess some of the determination that you had to not just give up because it would have been easy. I mean, she gave quite a bit of pushback.
Mhm.
And I think probably any of us who are advocating for anything can run into obstacles where people come back and they're maybe they are well intentioned, but they just had these blind spots. And I don't know if you know the one I'm thinking of, but that should open up.
So I don't know the one that you're thinking of, but I do know that that's a conversation that occurs pretty regularly because when you have the conversation, people feel like you're calling them out. So I try to go with the tone, no, I'm calling you in. I know that you're a good person. I know that this is not intentionally what you're setting out to do to make sure you're ruling out candidates. But let's look at some of the behaviors. Let's look at how we're structuring. Again, where are we starting off with the recruitment? Where are we putting our applications, our application notices out? And then when we're sitting here hiring for an entry level position, are you looking for some people to come more with more than entry level qualifications, and other people, because of how they look at you, assume that, oh, they'll be a good fit. And what do you mean when you say fit? And how do we get beyond that? Let's look at where you're recruiting, who's sitting on the panel, make sure that that panel is diverse. And also, if you're hiring for an entry level position, usually is the person trainable? And if you hire the person, the supervisor is going to have the opportunity to train them. Give that person that opportunity to get their foot in the door. Usually, most of the positions that we hire for, they had some type of examination before that, so the person met that first hurdle. Why is it we can't say that person gets hired, the other person gets hired, and let's see what happens? Let's actually, give them an opportunity to do the work, and let's see what happens. And we've done that. Once we've gotten across those conversations, we've done that, and both both parties who have been hired do well. And sometimes neither of them do well. We can say goodbye at that time, but opening those opportunities up and having the ability to have that conversation and to say, if you're recruiting, don't just go and throw your job posting at an affinity bar. Go and establish a relationship with that affinity bar so they know that you're welcoming of whatever the diversity characteristics they're going to bring into your organization. If you throw just an application at them, they really get that, this is tokenism. You really just want somebody who looks like me to put me on your brochure and say, oh, we hired somebody from this background. But you got to be genuine in your approach.
So now I have a question for you. In your book, which I have right here, Coffee and Conversations, which is a great book, and I encourage you all to purchase it. Um, you talk about that attorneys sometimes struggle with where they fit within the diversity conversation. And but then you say, but there is space in the inclusion piece, not only as our role in terms of working with people in the population, the people that are going that the attorney is going to represent, but also in your book, as you had mentioned with the gentleman named Chuck when you first came on board. What is it that we still need to do in order to create atmospheres in workplaces that for when people of color ascend to these positions, that they stay? What can you speak to that for a minute?
When I got hired in, it was probably a good 30 days before I got an invitation to lunch with anybody. If you wanted me to feel like I belong, is there some way that you could have made sure I had somebody to go to lunch with? Is there a way that somebody could have come by and checked on me, not just because they were my supervisor, but because they wanted me in that work environment? And I think that oftentimes the organizational leadership is just ignorant of that. And as I was describing Chuck, like I said, Chuck and my interactions, were inappropriate, but there was nobody who was there to intervene and tell this supervisor, you should be more welcoming and more inclusive, and instead of trying to tell the person, oh, there's no need for you to apply for the attorney position, you won't get it, you haven't been here long enough, yada yada yada. How do we make our environments more inclusive? And then if you're looking at it on the individual level, one of the things that I find very helpful is just, you coming in to check in and say hi. I also talk in the book about where I call myself out for being not the most inclusive person when we're doing the Judge from Japan program. Basically, it's like, hi, how you doing? See you in 3 months. Put you to the next assignment. Hi, how you doing? And just going, rote with it instead of saying, how can I really make this person feel more welcome? Let me make an office space for this person. Let me ask that person, what are you doing on the weekend, or how's everything going? How's the adjustment going? Those conversations, who are you having coffee with? If it's the same people that look like you, think like you're not being inclusive. What you're doing is just replicating yourself, replicating what you already know. When you want to be inclusive, you'll start having coffee, you'll start having lunch, you'll start having conversations with people who come from different backgrounds. And you'll be open to learning. You'll get over that initial apprehension, oh, they're different, or they're a stranger. You'll get over that apprehension and you'll open up.
Well, as a follow-up to your comments, can you talk a little bit about the normalcy of sometimes conversations can be uncomfortable? We tend to shy away from those things that either make us feel inadequate or not as skilled or knowledgeable. But can you talk about the idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable? And I loved your quote that you used from Brene Brown about the willingness to be vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yeah. We are not taught to have uncomfortable conversations. We are taught that certain things you only talk about inside your house, you only talk about with your groups that you're in. You don't have that conversation outside. Um, it could be because we're told that it could be life threatening, but I don't think that in most circumstances that's the case any longer. So, how do we begin to introduce these topics and have conversation? For me currently, my general counsel and I do like a lot of phone calls in the morning. He's a white male, I'm an African American woman. He'll comment on my hair, and then so he'll get a whole lecture about, braids, weave, and then he'll start sending me articles. So is this what you were talking about, or that's what you're talking about? He'll tell me about running, and he'll say, since I've been talking with you, I noticed there isn't a large, population of African American runners. So it's like you don't have to talk about just race relations and what's the race relation. You're talking about everyday things, but seeing that people have different experiences that they can bring and contribute to the topics.
Are frivolous questions allowed? Jackie, is that okay?
Absolutely. No question is frivolous.
Okay. Zenell, how come you haven't been tweeting any of your paintings in progress recently? I like your painting tweets.
Thank you. I haven't painted anything that, I've taken a picture of lately. So I just got a huge canvas and I'm throwing some paint on it and I'm like, okay, this looks weird. So thank you. I will do that.
I have another question if possible. You mentioned that you had at least a child or children. What are you doing differently in terms of what are you saying to them to make sure that they are more comfortable getting acclimated to what they have to deal with as young African American children?
Wow. So I think I'm really observing that with my youngest. She's RN, and she is in a work environment where one incident, she said there was an emergency. They call in senior staff. The senior staff comes in and says, okay, so you're the nurse's aide. You need to do X, Y, and Z. An ally stands up and tells that person, do you see the color of what she has on? That's what the RNs wear. And I'm like, thank you for handling that. And I don't have to drive to Ohio. So, and then, she comes home and she shares that. And, as a mother, I'm like, well, you need to go find another job. And she says, and can you tell me where this won't exist? And I was like, no, I can't. I said, but we got to figure out how to have the conversations that you need to have in that workplace. I said, and first of all, go back and definitely thank that person who stood up, who recognized that. How could you be so blind to not notice that she has on the colors that RNs wear? How would you what's negating that for you? Why couldn't you see that? And so I don't have the cure all for that one. But I told her, I said, you definitely need to have the conversations and have the supportive allies there, and to approach it in a way that you can be heard. So it's a day-to-day challenge on that one.
Okay, if I can do another frivolous question, thank you, Mark, for setting a stage in terms of that. But what, in terms of your writing the book and deciding to reach out to people and sharing that, yeah, and are you looking to build upon that now in terms of volume 2, or were there things after you? Because if we write things after we've written them, sometimes we think, whoa, I forgot this. I wish I would have added this to that, and maybe I'll do that in volume 2, or I'll do that. Is there anything that you're looking at in terms of moving forward with that, or has the writing of that caused you to move in a different direction?
So I love the writing of it, and I have basically a volume 2 manuscript upstairs. I don't like the publishing of it and the business of promoting it. So I was like, I think I was having a conversation with Linda McGee earlier, who I believe is she wrote a book as well, and she was like, well, we should, reach out and ask Fox 2 News to do something and this, and I was like, oh, that's not the part that I love. I like the writing of it. So I got other writings, and maybe they'll make it into print. I enjoy the news articles, because here's my 500, 600 words. You take care of publishing it. You get it out. I said what I needed to say on that particular issue, and I can move on. So I can't promise that there's something else, but at the end of the book, one of the topics that I'm still exploring is in our profession. We know that if we really want to make change, you got to look at where the majority is, and it's European males of a certain age who have access and influence when we think of law and we think of the justice system. How do I make sure that you're interested? How do I make sure that you're engaged and willing to move diversity and inclusion forward? How do I make sure that you know that there is a space for you and how you can help? It's not just being silent and saying, okay, yeah, I support diversity, I support inclusion, that we need some actual work and movement forward, because you'll have access to rooms, resources that I, as an African American woman, won't have. So I definitely want to make sure that allyship is built up. And I don't know if it'll be in a book or how it'll actually, or if it'll continue to be articles, how will it actually come to fruition?
Okay.
Thank you
Okay,
for that
thank you.
question.
No, thank you.
Speaking of your book, I do have another question. In the chapter titled The Year of Inclusion, and I quote, you said, I have proclaimed 2020 as the year of inclusion. I announced it on LinkedIn as an invitation for all of us to build inclusive workplaces in the legal community. So now we are in 2023. Have we done that? Is it better?
I think it's better. Um, and I think, a lot of that has happened to some of the tragedies that we've seen on national TV and some of the, trials and things like that. I think it's better. I, I, I'm still concerned, is it a 3-year, 4-year fad? What happens when things are no longer convenient for this conversation, or when people just get too uncomfortable or tired of having the conversations? Will they still show up? Will they still put in the effort? But I do believe it's better. But if you look at, like, say, the trends of hiring chief diversity officers, looks like there are a number of them hired, and then you go back and you say, well, tell me about your departments, and you find out there are no departments. It's just that one person, and you're like, well, you can't lift up a whole organization by yourself. So we got to make sure that we're not just talking it or doing the performative acts or doing the hollow acts, that we're actually building structures for it to become entrenched into who we are, into our organizations.
What steps should be taken to increase the U.S. population of Black lawyers?
There's a number of things there, Jason. First of all, people have to know that it's possible. And I don't know in the elementary school if people really know it's possible. The celebration that Kyra Bowden had in the Southfield Public Schools, that helps make it know that it's possible. And then you start seeing that, okay, here's this idea that I can be this. Now, what does it look like? Am I interacting? Couple of Sundays ago, I met a young lady who's in high school who believes she wants to be an attorney and practice international business. So I go there and I talk to her. Well, what do you think? And, this is what my experience has been. Reach out to the judge. It was Judge Dunnings, who's in Macomb County. Reach out to the judge there and ask if you can have a conversation with her. So plugging her in, so it's not something that's just in your imagination, or is it not something where you just have one person but I see it as the norm. I know what lawyers do, and planting that seed at an age that's very young, I think, is important. That they can see it, they understand it, and then it grows with them, and it just becomes part of. That's what the options are, and then you got to do something about all this law school tuition, because that's ridiculous too. So how do you make it affordable? It's great if you have the talent, but if the talent can't assess the educational means, it's not going to happen. So how do we make sure that there's resources available? First generational lawyers usually don't have the same resources as families where law has been in their name forever and ever. So how do we make sure that we can do that as well? So time, definitely treasures, and then cultivating that talent from elementary school all the way up, not waiting to law school and then talking about, oh, let's mentor. No, you need to start way back where.
Are there any, like, I know you spoke about it earlier about the allies, the European allies. Are there anything that they can do specifically to help cultivate that increased populations?
Again, you can go into the schools on the career days. You can partner with various organizations, the Black women lawyers, the Black judges associations. They're doing work in those schools. The Black Judges Associations was very critical with the Detroit Youth Choir coming out to the National Association of Women Judges. But before they came to perform for us, those judges went into that place where they were having those rehearsals and talked to those students and shared, what their experiences were. They were able to say, hey, I lived in the same zip codes that you're living in. Yes, I went to the same schools and they didn't look the same ways. But here's how I actually, navigated whatever to get here. So support them, go with them, send the money with them, do whatever you can. There's always something I think we can do, and we can continue to find ways to do it better. They're looking for mentors for the state bar event coming up on the 28th. And that event will be in person in Dearborn. Volunteer for some of those. It may take an hour or so out your day. Volunteer, sit across from a person. Let the high school student ask you questions. Like I said, I made a decision to be a lawyer when I was 6 or 7. Nobody told me it was going to take 8 years, after high school to do it. Nobody told me it was going to be challenging and even a lot different than what, undergrad was. I was like, you just go in, you learn the facts and you put them back down. What the heck is an IRAC, It's like, come on. And then I got to go buy commercial outlines? Really? Okay. But you learn what the game is, and you play the game. And then as soon as earlier that you can be exposed to it, just like playing the game of chess, the earlier you're exposed, the more opportunities you have to master it.
I see Florice, did you have a question? You have the floor. We got a few minutes left.
Well, I have a funny comment and I have a more serious.
Where is my A?
There you go. That's it.
I told
That's
everybody, where's my A?
I know. And by the time you write the second version of the book, I will have gone back to Wayne State. No, but that's the funny comment that no matter where I go, all over the world, when I bump into people, they mention that Counselor Brown here is looking for that A. I'm going to make that happen, right? I've got to make that happen. But seriously, I am so proud, so honored by what you said, so proud of what you're doing. And here's the twist that's going on in my mind, that as professors, we're hoping that all of our academic children are standing on our shoulders and moving forward. But through this effort, I think I'm standing on your shoulders because you're bringing to the forefront the significance of diversity. And only through that, you see, can we take the significance of this topic to another level. So you've touched me in ways that you will never know. And again, I'm on my way. I can't do it right now, but we're going to get that aid done. But thank you so much for this brilliant presentation. And as you know, I love you dearly. Thank you so much.
Love you back. Thank you. Thank you.
And we have one
So
more
I wish that
question.
would have been my day one law school experience.
I think squeeze in one more question. Jim, you have the floor.
Oh no, and I'm so controversial. I apologize, but I just I met Judge Brown earlier today on LinkedIn, and I thank you so much for sharing today. And I do have a rather controversial question. I'm not in the legal profession, but I've been in public behavioral health here in Arizona for about 25 years, and I kind of threw out because I ran an outpatient clinic serving 1,600 adults with serious mental illness. And we recognize that if you are white and wealthy, you do something wrong, you go to outpatient treatment. But if you are brown, black, or poor, you do something wrong, you go to jail or prison. And I think that Judge was part of the Stepping Up initiative with the National Association of State Courts. And we really were recognizing that. Well, even the APA finally admitted that, you know, the whole DSM criteria was based on racist segregationist criteria. So to me, that was a game changer. So my question, Judge, before you go, is the game starting to change? Thank you.
Okay, so first let me correct you. Never been a judge. Hopefully there's somebody out there who aspires to be one, but I'm the administrator. I like that part of it.
Oh,
I
thank you.
think
I
the
know the
game.
difference. I worked with Kid Batty down here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kid Batty was one of my predecessors, so tell him
I
hi.
love him.
I think the game is changing, and I think the game is changing as we see that, you know, there's more representation and that ideas are getting the opportunity not to be covered up, but we're looking at the systems and saying, okay, so we think they're neutral, but the results are. And then when you start looking at the results, if you're seeing that there's a disparate impact, how do we make the changes? How do we make the changes? I was sharing on the call before I joined this one, we were talking about the future trends of workforce. And I was like, you know, most of us have stepped in and inherited a work environment that was created on a 1960s, 1970s models based upon the people who were in that workforce at that time. Those people were not often female. Those people were not often people of color. Those people had a very different background. And now we're saying that we want to use all the talent. So we got to start looking at the systems that we're in, the workplaces that we're in, and seeing what needs to change and not just doing
And thank
things
you
the
for
way
that.
that we've always done them just because.
Yeah, and having been born in Philadelphia in 1960 and then moving to Georgia before I was a year old and seeing Jim Crow South active till 1968 and growing up in North Carolina and seeing that welcome to KKK click tree all the way till I graduate in 78. I thank you that you haven't stopped.
No, I'll continue.
And
Thank you.
And with that, I would just like to extend a sincere and heartfelt thank you, Zenell, for speaking on these issues and for sharing the rich history of African Americans in our state and within the legal community. We thank you for your advocacy and appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon. We look forward to more coffee and conversations. Pick up a copy. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.